So Todd Akin is at it again. Now, earlier, I think it was late last week, it came out that in 2008 he claimed that doctors were giving abortions to women who were not pregnant, and they were doing this just to make money. Well, now his campaign has come out and said that, yeah, he did say that, and he stands by it. And I'm going to give you a quote from HuffingtonPost. It says, in a statement to BuzzFeed, Akin spokesman Rick Tyler called the congressman's comments factual and cited an investigative news article from 1978 as evidence that doctors trick women into thinking they're pregnant in order to collect fees for an abortion. There's ample evidence that abortion doctors on any number of occasions have deceived women into thinking that they're pregnant, and they collect money for a procedure that they don't perform, he said. And I say they don't perform it because obviously the women weren't pregnant. Tyler said nobody hears about this happening anymore because the problem is no longer talked about. That's a war on women that never gets reported, he said, adding, I don't want Todd to be held to some standard because there's no accurate reporting on abortion, because there isn't. Now, two things that are interesting about this. One is I find it pretty offensive that a spokesperson for Todd Akin is using the term war on women when in fact it's Akin and other ultra-conservative Republicans like him who are conducting the war on women. The other is that marvelous last sentence that says, I don't want Todd to be held to some standard because there's no accurate reporting on abortion, because there isn't. Oh, that's good. So let's just make shit up. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about an article here in the Chicago Sun-Times, the abortion profiteers making a killing in Michigan Avenue clinics, in which they claimed that, some women were getting abortions who weren't pregnant. Some are pregnant, some are not. Most will be sold abortions. So I have no idea how accurate this article is, but I'm going to talk about this in a minute. First of all, we have to go back to 1973, because in 1973, Roe versus Wade made abortions legal in the United States. Now, just because they were legal didn't mean they were available. It took quite a while to get to where we are today. At that time, states and communities tried to make it very, very difficult for women to have abortions, even creating zoning laws that essentially made it impossible to have a clinic that conducted abortions in their town, or having onerous regulations. So there were a lot of lawsuits and various cases to make abortion more available. And it's taken years to get, as I said, to where we are today, where abortions are available. But I want to look at something else here, too, and that is the Hyde Amendment. Hyde Amendment was in 1976. And what is the point of the Hyde Amendment? Well, the Hyde Amendment was to stop any government money from going to abortion in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. So in other words, Medicare could not fund abortion, and the government could not give money to any group that provided abortions. Now, the Hyde Amendment did have some exceptions for the life of the mother, and then later to rape and incest. However, it's very difficult to prove rape, and in many cases the women were subjected to rather intrusive questioning to try to prove that it's rape. And of course, a lot of women don't report rapes. Back then, it was even worse because there was so much shame to being raped, and people just didn't believe it. That was like, oh, you must have done something to cause it. So what the Hyde Amendment effectively did was it made low-cost abortions very difficult to find. So you couldn't get them through Medicare, and groups like, Planned Parenthood, for one, didn't get any funding for abortions. Planned Parenthood funding for abortion is completely independent. It doesn't come from the federal government at all, because Planned Parenthood, only 4% of what they do are abortions. So this made abortions, as I said, difficult to get, and it meant that women had to pay out of pocket for abortions. So at this time, I do remember that there were some controversies. There were some people who decided to take advantage of this. Let's go out and let's set up abortion clinics and rake in the money. Now, this doesn't mean that this was widespread or that it even lasted for very long. So what Todd Akin is doing is, he's doing something conservatives really like to do, which is, let's go back to the past and find something that fits what we want to fit. Kind of reminds me of the creationists who try to argue their point of view by saying that, Isaac Newton believed in creation. Yeah, and when did Isaac Newton live? I mean, seriously. So he's going back to 1978 to an article that, again, I have no idea how correct it is. I also don't know, again, how widespread this is. However, today, most physicians will tell you that because abortion is readily available, this just doesn't exist. This is something, conservatives have brought up time and time again and has never been proven. If you're going to come up with a statement, you got to provide some proof. It does not exist. The fact that there may have been a time and a place where people did try to take advantage of abortion and to try to make money off of it doesn't mean that this was ever widespread, and it certainly doesn't mean that it goes on today. But I want to go back and talk about Todd Akin for a minute on his original debacle, which is when he started to talk about how pregnancy from rape is really rare, and that if it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. And we've already heard about that. I'm not going to go into it, except, of course, it's nonsense. I want to talk about where did he get this idea. This idea comes from a guy named John Wilkie, who is a physician. He's not a researcher of any kind whatsoever, and he wrote an article, and I'm going to show you part of this article, and I'll give you links to it below. And he also wrote a book with his wife, which is basically the same thing. And this is not peer-reviewed or anything. He just wrote it. And he claims that rape pregnancies are rare. So what he did was he did some numerical folderol here. And I'm not going to go through these steps because I'm going to go through them later to come up with a low number for pregnancy for rape. But this is the last part of what he says here. He says, finally, factor in certainly one of the most important reasons why a rape victim rarely gets pregnant, and that's physical trauma. Every woman is aware that stress and emotional factors can alter her menstrual cycle. To get and stay pregnant, a woman's body must produce a very sophisticated mix of hormones. Hormone production is controlled by a part of the brain that is easily influenced by emotions. There's no greater emotional trauma that can be experienced by a woman than an assault rape. This can radically upset her possibility of ovulation, fertilization, implantation, and even nurturing of a pregnancy. So what further percentage reduction in pregnancy will this cause? No one knows, but this factor certainly cuts the last figure by at least 50% and probably more. If we use the 50% figure, we have a final figure of 225 women pregnant each year. Okay, a couple things about this. First of all, there's this line about hormone production controlled by a part of the brain that is easily influenced by emotions. This kind of reminds me of the really bad old days when women were just considered to be hysterical. Everything was in their mind. They weren't really ill, and it was, yes, hormone production can be caused by stress. Men can become impotent by stress. It's not just women. And we already know that this just simply isn't true. There's no proof whatsoever that a woman can be so emotional that she can shut down pregnancies. The other part here is this factor certainly cuts this last figure by 50%. 50%, where the hell does he come up with this number? Well, he just makes it up. And when he makes it up, he gets a figure of 225. Well, let's look at an actual peer-reviewed paper. This is Rape-Related Pregnancy Estimates and Descriptive Characteristics from a National Sample of Women. I'll give you a link. And it says here, the national rape-related pregnancy rate is 5% per rape. Okay, so let's look at what this means here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use Wilkie's numbers. At this point, I don't care if they're correct or not. He says 200,000 rapes per year, 33% of females too old or too young to get pregnant, which means 133,000 rapes where pregnancy is possible. 5% result in pregnancy due to the peer-reviewed study, which means 6,650 pregnancies per year, which is a far cry from Wilkie's 225. So let's go back and take a look at Wilkie's numbers. Okay, his first point is that there's out of 200,000, that 133,000 at risk. Okay, I've accepted that. His second point is a woman is capable of being fertilized only 3 days. Multiply our figure by 3/10. Okay, this is irrelevant. Why is this irrelevant? Because he's talking about possible rapes, the possible pregnancies per rape. The 5% is the actual figure. His next point is 1/4 of all women have been sterilized. Again, this is irrelevant. He's talking about possible rapes. The 5% is possible pregnancies per rape. The 5% is actual pregnancies. The next point is 1/2 of assailants penetrate and or deposit sperm. So let's cut it in half. Again, he's talking about possible pregnancies per rape. The 5% is actual pregnancies per rape. So this is irrelevant. And then next 3 points, 15% of men are sterile. Again, that's irrelevant. 15% of non-surgically sterilized women are naturally sterile. Again, that's irrelevant. Another 15% are on the pill and are already pregnant. And that's also irrelevant. So he reduces the number because of those 3 things. But those are irrelevant, again, because he's talking about possible rapes. The 5% is possible pregnancy for rape. The 5% is actual pregnancy for rape. Then this wonderful line. Now factor in the fact that it takes 5 to 10 months for the average couple to achieve a pregnancy. Use a smaller figure of 5 months to be conservative and divide the above figures by 5. The number drops to 600. What the? I mean, what possible relevance does this have? Even beyond the fact that he's talking about possible pregnancies for rape, the 5% is actual pregnancies. This is completely irrelevant. His next line is, in an average population, the miscarriage rate is about 15%. In this case, we have incredible emotional trauma. Her body is upset. Even if she conceives, the miscarriage rate will be higher in a more normal pregnancy. If 20% of raped women miscarry, the figure drops to 450. Okay, where is there remotely any proof for this? I have no idea. 20%, he's just making this crap up. Plus, this is also irrelevant. And just because there's a miscarriage doesn't mean that there wasn't a pregnancy. Plus, let's look at something else here. This is the U.S. Department of Justice report, Extent, Nature, and Consequences of Rape Victimization, Findings from the National Violence Against Women Survey. Okay, and this was in 2006. Now, let's go back to our numbers here. Now, what this said, see in the box here, what the researchers found is that in a single year, more than 300,000 women and almost 93,000 men are estimated to have been raped. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, because when we talk about rape, we're usually talking about women. Well, we seem to usually be talking about women. 93,000 men raped. That's a lot. And whenever we talk about rape, we really need to consider that figure as well, because that's nearly a third of the number of women who've been raped. Okay. But let's say we're going to use this figure of 300,000 rapes, then that would be, again, adjusting for the 33% and then the 5%, 10,000 pregnancies due to rape. It's a far, far cry from Wilkie's manufactured 225 pregnancies. But even if it was 225 pregnancies, why should these women carry a rapist child? Now, I don't know, by the way, if that 33% of females too young or too old is accurate. I didn't look it up. I don't really care. I'm willing to accept it because I come up with a figure of 10,000, which is, as I said, far, far from the 225. So what is this all about? Well, it's just simply that the ultra-conservatives in the Republican Party want to shut rape down, period. They don't even want exemptions for incest or rape. They've actually commented in the past, I don't have the references right now, but things like, oh, well, incest isn't so bad, that's how we breed animals, and there have been kingdoms in the past where, people were closely related and blood, so on and so forth, and, well, yeah, and, you might want to look at the royal heads of Europe, because hemophilia, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff, was inherited in those guys, so they were way too closely related, so that's not a good argument. Besides the fact, think of the emotional trauma of someone who has been raped by a close relative. And of course, and incest, or incest, I did say rape when I meant incest, but a lot of incest cases are rape as well, even though they may not be reported, because you might have what you call statutory rape, where a relative has taken advantage of a younger member. But it doesn't make any difference. If it's incest or rape, these people should have the right to choose whether or not they want to carry a child to term. And the numbers nowadays show that a vast number of people in this country are approving having abortion legal. So these guys are going to fail anyway. But I just wanted to bring this up because I wanted to show you the numbers here. It basically show you what a complete, absolute idiot that Todd Akin and those of his people who support this point of view are. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.